It's a funny story. I had a girlfriend, and for 6 months, called and called and called, and God knows, and God knows, and God knows. She recognized me from school and she said, you know what, I'll have a meeting with you, let's have a meeting. I said yes, but I didn't know what the next line was. And we had a cup of coffee and we spoke about school and old times. The truth is I didn't really remember who she was. And I realized just how bad the situation actually was. But let's keep that a secret. In hindsight, even though at the time it was the worst day, it wasn't the worst day of my life. It was the best day of my life. It's a funny story because how Creative Council started was I had a girlfriend and my girlfriend was doing promotions. You know, serving toothpaste in a store, serving alcohol in a store and getting people to taste it. And I went to visit her in a store and I saw 60 other people like her. 60 other people in one supermarket on one day doing promotions. And I looked at this and I thought, here's an opportunity because they're all doing it badly. So the Creative Council started as an in-store promotion business. We used to put people in the stores doing promotions. We then realized that to get people while they're shopping is the last domino in a whole series of dominoes. And we created what they call a consumer engagement group. So we engage consumers at different touch points and get them to change the way they act or transact. Basically change the way they buy things. And that's the Creative Council group. And today we are the biggest consumer engagement group in South Africa, maybe even in Africa. We house about 600 or 700 staff. We're a 600 million rand turnover group. We're made up of multiple companies, and it's been a lot of fun. I think for an entrepreneur, or for anyone starting a business, there's nothing worse than cold calling. And when we started the business, we literally started with the yellow pages and we started cold calling. And we had this spreadsheet, literally, and I still have the spreadsheet actually, and I look at it every now and then, where we had people's names, something about their lives, and when they told us to call back, it was our version of a CRM package, so to speak. And for 6 months, we called and called and called, and God knows, and God knows, and God knows. I won't forget the one time I called someone and I said, hi, I do promotions. And he said, what type of promotions do you do? And I said, I'm not sure, let me phone you back. And I went to my business partner and I said, someone said yes, but I didn't know what the next line was. And so we progressed and progressed and we phoned and phoned and phoned. And eventually, after 9 months of being in business and not making any money whatsoever, I phoned Neu-Ner, and it was probably my 100th call to Neu-Ner, but luckily I got hold of one lady, and I said to her, hi, my name is Ran, and I do promotions, and she said, Ran, what school did you go to? And she recognized me from school, and she said, you know what, I'll have a meeting with you, let's have a meeting. And I went there for a meeting, and we had a cup of coffee, and we spoke about school and old times. The truth is I didn't really remember who she was, but let's keep that a secret. And she briefed me that day and she said, look, you know, you're lucky because we're having a pitch for a new agency, and if you want to pitch, you can. Now bear in mind, we had no money. We had a 12 square meter office in Hillbrow, okay? We had no expertise and I didn't even know how to use PowerPoint. And she gave me this document which was this thick. And the essence of the document said, you have to have a refrigerated infrastructure. You have to be able to operate nationally in the whole of South Africa on the same day. You have to have experience, and the list went on and on. And I went back to the office and I put together a 6-slide PowerPoint presentation. It took me about a week because I never knew how to use PowerPoint. First time I'd ever used PowerPoint. I was an ex-stockbroker, what do I know about PowerPoint? And put this pitch document together and arrive at Neu-Ner on the day of the pitch and sit down at the entrance on my own. And the company that was pitching before me walked out, and there were 10 of them. And they had suitcases, and they had portfolios, and they had prints and samples. And there I was, myself alone, with a little bag. And I walked into this boardroom, and that was the next shock. And the next shock was that the boardroom was a horseshoe-shaped boardroom with 15 people. And I was expecting to pitch to one person. Long story short, I plug in my laptop. It's not working, it's not presenting, and eventually it did. And I caught a glimpse of one of the ladies in the room and I realized just how bad the situation actually was. And so I looked them in the eye and I closed my laptop and I said, I'm in a predicament. because I don't get work because I don't have experience. And I don't get experience because I don't get work. And I'm so passionate, I just need one chance. Just give me one chance. And all the people in the room looked at each other and giggled and whispered in each other's ears. And I said, I'm not leaving here until you guys give me one chance. And eventually I said, you know what, we'll give you one chance. We'll give you the small campaign. And if you get it right, we'll give you the whole account. And I left there and they gave me this chance and we got it right. And 13 years later, we're still Neu-Ner's agency. So that's the first account. The worst day of my life. So in hindsight, even though at the time it was the worst day, it wasn't the worst day of my life. It was the best day of my life. Because we only learn from our failures. So at the time, we had an internet venture, which we raised a lot of money for in the .com era. And we ran this startup internet company for around about 3 years. And 1 week before we were supposed to go live, we arrive at the office and there's a padlock on the door. And there's a letter from the sheriff. And it says, in real legal jargon, it says, you're in liquidation, you run out of money, and anything in this building now belongs to a liquidator. And if you want your personal possessions or your personal belongings, contact the liquidator, contact the sheriff. And I remember feeling responsible for the lives of all my staff. I had 30 staff who had lived the dreams of this 25-year-old visionary for a long time, for 3 years, people with families. And I'll never forget turning around and looking at these people in the eye and realizing that I was responsible for all their lives. So I summoned my business partner, we went to a coffee shop, and we wrote down on a serviette how much money we had between the two of us. And we realized that we could pay them each 2 times their monthly salary, and we did. And that's how we left it. And that was the beginning of a very bad phase for us, because we had no money, no confidence, no job, no prospects of employment, because who wants to employ a failed entrepreneur? The main thing is we had no confidence. So whenever we walked into a meeting, we felt ashamed. Our last venture was an unsuccessful venture. And we spent 6 months looking for something to do. And luckily, we stumbled on this opportunity at Creative Council. Look, I love where we're at. So it's very hard to say that I would have done anything different, but along the way there's many lessons. I think I did a lot of things wrong along the way. I think I did more things wrong than I did right, actually. What would I change? Well, I think the first thing that I'd change is I'd hire the right people from the start. So I think the problem is that entrepreneurs, when they start a business, don't believe that it's going to be successful. So you start with a small business mentality. And what I learned was that you actually got to start with the end goal in mind, with the big business mentality, and hire the best people, have the best people around you. Don't be scared. Pay an extra 5,000 or 10,000 a month, because the return that you're going to get is way better. The reality is that the learnings and the hardships are actually what teaches you things. So obviously I would have liked not to lose everything, but in hindsight I think it's the biggest blessing in the world, because you actually learn a lot more when you lose than when you gain. Because when things are going well, you don't gain anything. Of course, there are many lessons that I took out of it. Things like hire the best people, have the best people around you. Think big even when you're small. And I know it sounds very cliched, but the reality is that when I started this business, we started it thinking it was going to be a small business. And so we hired small people. And so we had to almost keep changing our people. Now what we should have done is get the best people up front. So I think it's a problem, it's a mistake that all entrepreneurs make at some stage. Another very common mistake for entrepreneurs is forget about the systems and worry about the sales. And the reality is it should be the other way around. Make sure you've got foundations, make sure you've got systems. The main lesson that I learned was that losing everything can sometimes be a blessing. I can tell you that for me, losing everything is the only reason why I have what I have. It's because I lost everything, I was humbled, I took the lessons that came out of it, and when I built again, I built properly. And I never made the mistakes that I made in the past. And I was much more prudent. So I think the best lessons are learned from failure. In fact, I think sometimes the only lessons I learned from failure. So I know it sounds crazy, but I'm glad I failed. And I'd back someone who failed much quicker than I'd back someone who's never failed. Someone who's failed has made mistakes and has learned from their mistakes. Someone who's only had successes, and I take it back to my own experience. I had a lot of very successful ventures before the internet venture. After the internet venture, I lost everything. Whatever I'd made in all my successful ventures, I lost immediately in the internet venture. And so I realized that the only time that I actually learned a real lesson was when I lost. And before that, I was arrogant and I thought that I ruled the world and that I couldn't make a mistake. And I was 20 or 25 years old and I was the most successful guy. And I thought it would last forever. And I didn't take any learnings. And I only got the real lessons from the failures. So yes, of course, I'm glad I had the failures. Of course, at the time, it wasn't pleasant. It didn't feel good. But in hindsight, I'm really happy about it.